What drives someone to ditch their shoes and run barefoot through mountains, trails, and even snow? Ken Posner does just that, and he's tackled the grid, climbing all 35 Catskill peaks every month for a year. We dive into his extreme endurance, barefoot mindset, and his upcoming book. Let's jump in with Ken Posner. Welcome to Journey with Jake. This is a podcast about adventure and how through our adventures we can overcome the challenges of life that come our way. While I expect you will learn some things about different adventures, this show will entertain you. Each episode will feature a different guest or guests as they share experiences and stories from the different adventures they have been on. Not only will you be entertained, but you will also hear the failures and trials each guest faces and what they have done or are doing to overcome the hardships that come their way. My goal is to take each of us on a journey through the experiences of my guests with the hope that you'll be entertained and inspired to overcome your day-to-day challenges. After all, it's not all about the destination as it is about the journey. Welcome to Journey with Jake. This show is all about people who chase adventure, push limits, and live life with purpose. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Journey with Jake Podcast. And don't forget, you can also catch full episodes on YouTube. This podcast is proud to be part of the Podmatch Podcast Network, connecting podcasters with incredible guests from around the world. Check out podmatch.com/network. Today's guest, Ken Posner, is a barefoot endurance runner who's completed the grid, climbing all 35 Catskill peaks every month for a year. Beyond the physical feat, Ken shares powerful lessons on simplicity, mindset, and pushing your limits. I walked away from this conversation with a new perspective on how we move through life, literally and figuratively. If you enjoy this episode, check out episode 41 with ultra marathon legend Dean Karnazes for even more inspiration from the world of extreme endurance. Let's get to my conversation with Ken Posner. All right, this is fun. I've got Barefoot Ken with me today. Ken, welcome to Journey with Jake.
Hey, Jake, I'm just super excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this is exciting. I said Barefoot. I know that's not your official name. I know it's Ken Posner, but if you don't mind, give us a little background on who you are, and then we're going to dive into this whole why we're even talking bare feet to begin with. So yeah, tell me a little background on where you're from, all that good stuff.
Sure, I'll make it quick. I grew up in Chicago. First job out of college was U.S. Army, so I'm a peacetime veteran. Just briefly, 4 years from a long time ago. After that, went to business school and became a Wall Street analyst. So learned to deal with some volatility in the markets. Happened to be covering mortgage stocks during the great financial crisis. So my sector was wiped out, and I was too. But I got back into business, did a combat role, got back on my feet, and got a corporate job, which is what I continue to do to this day. As we'll talk about, Jake, over the years, to balance, the intensity of work, the demands, competitiveness, I got into a little bit of running, and that became trail running, and then ultra marathons, and then peak bagging and through hiking. And that's where our story kicks off, actually.
I love it. And I love it because I've had a few ultra runners on the show. I've had someone who likes to bag peaks, as you say, mountain climb. I've had some through hikers, some trail hikers. You've kind of done it all, which I think is fantastic. And then you're doing it barefoot as well, which we'll get into in just a minute. For you, getting into that whole, picking up running, doing that sort of thing, something that you kind of did as a kid, or did you just kind of pick it up later? Was it the whole stress of the jobs and stuff that you're like, hey, let me get out and get some exercise? What was it about running and getting outdoors, that type of thing, that led you to that?
Well, I tried to do some running as a kid, but I had chronic shin splints, so I couldn't really do very much at all. And it was only, now obviously in the Army, I did some running. I put up with the problem and just gutted it out. It was later in my 40s, I saw colleagues at work beginning to fall by the wayside. My boss had a mild heart attack and retired early, and I got to take over his portfolio. And I was like, well, look, I'm advancing in my career. But there was sort of a pattern there. And then it happened again with a colleague who got sick and left. And so I realized in my 40s that I was going to need to invest in myself if I was going to make it, to the long term. So entirely pragmatic at first. But the thing about loving is that I I loved it so much that once I got into it for pragmatic reasons, it began to take over my life.
Bit to take over, you developed a love for it, like you said. And then, okay, we're just going to dive into it early here because I mean, I could go a lot more about this whole running thing just because it's amazing. First of all, kudos. Those of you guys who run trails, who ultra run, incredible. And again, I've had a few. I don't know if you know who Dean Karnazes is. He was on the show.
Sure,
Amazing.
sure. And he's a hero of mine. And I read his book, The Ultra Marathon Man. And
Yeah,
I was like, and he had a corporate crisis, didn't he?
correct. Yeah, same type of thing. I've seen similarities between a lot of these ultra runners, and kind of that's seems kind of like there's some sort of, it's not necessarily a crisis, but there's something that pushes them towards doing this, and I feel like
You
that's
have this feeling
similar.
that maybe there's something not quite right with the world. And the idea bothers you like the proverbial splinter in the back of your mind. That can happen. And I listened to your excellent episode with Jeremy George, and he sort of a period of challenge. He had a number of challenges, and it led him just to re-examine where he was going in life.
Absolutely. And you've done a lot. I kind of looked at some of your stats of, I think it's 100 plus marathons. You've done a lot. Where did the barefoot come about? When did you decide, okay, I'm going to start running barefoot, or was it hiking barefoot? How did the whole barefoot thing come about?
Well, you'll find that I'm very impressionable because Dean Karnazes was part of the reason I got into ultra running. The most popular running book of all time is Chris McDougall's Born to Run, in which he advocates for barefoot running as a way to restore natural gait and alignment. And his argument, his theory is that shoes are great for what they do, but they can predispose people to injury because they change your gait ever so much. So apparently I'm the only person who didn't get the memo. And the memo is, hey, it's just an idea. It's just a metaphor. It's about seeking the primal activities that we attribute to our ancestors, but you're not supposed to actually do it. I didn't get that memo, so I began to experiment with it. And again, only for pragmatic reasons, because I was, guess what, starting to have injuries. And I was like, I better give this a try before I run myself to pieces. And the surprise was how much fun it was. And so as I started doing it, I lost interest in shoes. So just to be clear, I think it's 116 marathons and ultras. Most of those were in shoes. It's only the last 26 that have been barefoot.
The last 26, though. That's pretty impressive. I got to tell you, so last fall, it's November, I ran in a half marathon down in southern Utah in a little town called St. George. It's called the Snow Canyon Half Marathon. Beautiful canyon that you run through down there, just gorgeous. And I'm cruising along, and I'm probably about 4 or 5 miles in, right in the heart of the canyon, just beautiful. People are passing me, I'm passing people. There's thousands of runners in this thing. And sure enough, someone goes flying by me barefoot. And I was just like shocked. Some people next to me started clapping and cheering for him, and they were just like, and here he goes, just running barefoot. So to me, it's just, from the outside looking in, it's amazing that you do that because it's hard to imagine.
That happened to me at the Boston Marathon twice and at the New York City Marathon. Alex Ramsey, I think, is the guy and he's a very accomplished barefoot and sandal runner. I think it was Alex. And of course, I was running in minimalist shoes. So I was like, hey, that's so cool. But, I'm wearing minimalist shoes. But he was already past me. At the Boston Marathon, I saw this guy running. And, I was trying to set a personal best. So I was in racing modes, like, "Grrr." And he just ran past me and he was smiling. And then he took out a little camera and took some pictures and ran on. But here's the weird thing, Jake. After reading Chris McDougall's book, I started. This is gonna sound weird. I started noticing people's feet a little bit more. I was in Central Park, and a man and his daughter ran past barefoot, and I was like, "Wow, that looks so natural." I was in the Metropolitan Museum of Art with some family and looking at the ancient Greek and ancient Roman statues, and I thought, their feet look really strong, not like modern feet. So and this is what happens when you read what Dean Karnazes or Chris McDougall or people have to say. It starts, wheels turning in your head, and then you start to notice things, and then possibly you realize you're out on a frontier somewhere that maybe you didn't even realize was out there.
There's something I read that you said. You talked about Running barefoot, being out in nature barefoot. It's like the original human mindfulness, I think is how you said it.
Yes.
How does being barefoot, how does it enhance all of that?
Well, when I went through U.S. Army Ranger School a long, a long time ago, like almost 40 years ago, they taught us mindfulness. They called it pay attention to detail, Ranger. So going barefoot, you have to pay attention to where you step because it's super fun unless you land on on a rock or something like that. Then it's not so much fun. So I think, and you'll hear people, Jake, talk about earthing and grounding and the mental calm it produces. And there are these theories about electrons and ions, and I can't tell you about that stuff. My theory is that a large portion of our brain is there to move our soft feet over rough ground. And when those parts of the mind are engaged, that's being like our ancestors were, living naked in the forest, and you're fully engaged with what you're doing. When you shield your feet with shoes, those parts of your mind, they go to sleep. They don't have anything to do. They don't actually go to sleep. They start working on other problems, like how much you hate Trump or Biden, or how your spouse just pissed you off, or whatever you just saw on social media, or your friend who said something that wasn't really nice. And so you can't do that really when you have to pay attention every step. So that's why I call it the original human mindfulness.
I like that. It's a good way to look at it, good approach for it. I've got to hear a few stories though. You've had to have stepped on something that's hurt, or you've had to done something to your foot. Any stories, any examples you have?
Well, I mean, when I first started out, I got a little piece of glass in my foot and I had to go to a clinic and a nurse pulled it out with tweezers and that cost me $150. So over the last 10 years, 13,900 miles of barefoot, that's the only medical expenses I've had. Although barefoot is part of what I call minimalism, and it's about pushing boundaries without technology to see what you can do. And that's so that so snow and ice, there's limits. We all have limits. They might be different. And I can assure you that cold weather injuries or cold injuries, they hurt like hell. I think that's the body's way of saying, don't ever do this again. So I have pushed it a little bit too hard, a little bit too far on a couple occasions, but and cold and ice, but no permanent damage. It's just,
Wow.
a little bit of frost nip is really painful.
Do you have a certain like temperature that you're like, okay, if it's this, I'm not going to do it. If it's this, I will still
Yes.
do it. Okay, what's your base?
In the 30s when it gets wet on rough terrain, that starts to get less fun, and probably the upper 20s when it's dry.
It's cold.
But otherwise, the challenge with barefoot, it's not so much physical, it's mental. It's like I'm a runner, and I'm used to going, not, and I can't run fast like Dean Karnazes used to do. He's a little bit older. We're all getting old. But I'm used to a steady pace, a steady rhythmic pace, like in your half marathon, I'm sure you were doing. Barefoot is a lot more variable. On smooth roads or sandy trails or at the track, I can run just as fast as in shoes. But on gravel, no, sir. So I showed up at a 5K, and unbeknownst to me, they had changed the course. It used to run through a little downtown area, and they moved it out to a rail trail that was freshly paved with gravel. And so my time was 5 times slower. I could barely walk on it. And being stubborn, I just refused to put on shoes, and I was the last place, and it was over an hour for a 5K. But so that's the challenge with barefoot. It can be very slow. Shoes are great for protection against sharp objects, no question, or cold or other hostile environments.
What does it do for you kind of mentally? Like when you complete a marathon or a 5K barefoot, what does it do for you?
And this is the surprise to me. For a former, Army Ranger and Wall Street guy to discover in my later years that I had become a flower child, it's not. I wouldn't have predicted this for you a few years back. It's so much fun, and it's similar to your experience at the half marathon when you go out there and you do something. You do something natural. You put out the energy, and you're like, at least I got myself from A to B. It's empowering. But the funny thing is there's so much information that comes from your feet. Your feet have as many nerve endings as your hands or your face. And so to go through life with all that shielded is sort of boring. And once you unshield your feet, it's just really engaging. And you get the sense, wow, like I just did 3 more miles and I'm happy. I think here's my theory is that Mother Nature she gave us the energy to go out and do what we needed to do. And our ancestors had to go through the forest, and they didn't have shoes way back when. They had to go through the forest and the desert and the mountains and find food. And, their feet would have hurt, but they had to keep going. So Mother Nature gave them joy as a form of energy, which is the joy of movement through nature. And we feel that running or hiking or walking, and barefoot just sort of gives you that extra layer of information. So it's so much, and you can't explain this to anybody in shoes. They just stare at you like you've lost your mind.
I'm not saying you lost your mind, but it is hard for me as someone who's never done it. It is hard for me to think about that. I'm still trying to envision it.
Here's the thing for your listeners too. I mean, I'm very grateful to Chris McDougall because I would not have gone down this path without reading Born to Run, but you don't have to go running barefoot. Running barefoot is a bit of a transition because ligaments and tendons, you're changing your geometry ever so subtly, and that's a big deal for a ligament. But I think most people could go barefoot walking or hiking without a lot of adaptation. In fact, I just led a little workshop or a little group hike just on Sunday. We did about 4 miles in Harriman Park in the Hudson Valley in New York. And there were plenty of rocks and some patches of grass and dirt. And the younger folks just shot ahead like it was nothing. Some of us aging dinosaurs had to work on balance a little bit on some of the slippery sections. It was just fun. And, people look so different going barefoot. It's a more delicate way of moving across the earth. You pay attention, you're careful, you move more slowly. But it was just so much. It was so much fun. So I would tell folks, just give it a try and your feet will tell you. Like when I first did my first barefoot run, and this is again 10 years ago, I just did 1.25 miles and I was self-conscious. I took my sandals off and hid them behind a bush and ran around, was embarrassed, and got a couple of scratches. And I was like, this is total meh. But the next morning when I woke up, my feet were sort of tingling. And it was clear they wanted more. They wanted more sensations, more textures, more experience. And so give it a little try and see what your body and your feet tell you. They might tell you, don't ever do this again.
Well, I tell you what, though, the fact that you did it, now I'm in my mind, I'm like, okay, I could at least go walk around the park that's close by.
Yeah.
Just give that a shot.
Or go into your local coffee shop. You can walk down. And then if people ask you, what are you doing? You could say, well, there's this crazy guy on my podcast and he threw out a challenge. So I had by the way, if you go barefoot in the city or in the town, now you're crossing a different frontier. Now you're putting yourself out there and doing something that's visibly different from other people. That's different from the physical frontier of seeing if you can relearn the art of moving naturally that we no longer practice generally. So I don't think I've been out in Utah in several years, but I've noticed that like in the Northeast, there's a higher grumpiness ratio compared to the Southwest. I think people in Utah would be pretty cool generally, but in like in Massachusetts and New Hampshire and places like that, in small towns you might get confronted.
So this leads me to the question then, are you, like, when you just going around town and stuff, are you going barefoot all the time, or are you just really? Yeah. So you're barefoot Ken.
Yeah. And it started with, I mean, I had heard about people. Again, I started with barefoot running as a way to prevent injury. And I got into barefoot hiking thinking that would help with the natural form while taking a break from running, since I was dealing with running injuries. And then I heard about people who went around barefoot full time, and I thought, that's interesting, a little odd. But then I heard about a challenge, and it's called the Barefoot Autism Challenge. And I think there was an autism challenge a few years ago where you got to dump a bucket of ice water on your head. If I
remember that. Yep.
I think that's not to be unpopular. But the Barefoot Autism Challenge is the idea of a guy named Tyler Leach, who is somebody with autism. He lives in Iowa. And he said, hey, in the autistic community, barefoot is popular in many cases because of the sensory input. It helps folks process their surroundings. It's back to that idea of earthing and grounding and the mental calm. And he said, hey, the challenge is just to go somewhere barefoot for the experience and to show support for the autistic community. So just post a picture on Twitter or Instagram hashtag Barefoot Autism Challenge. And I heard that, and you know what I heard? I heard, besides the barefoot and the autism part, I heard the word challenge. And challenges are interesting. And this is part of your theme, Jake. Challenges put you out there somewhere and they expose you to a wild or unmanaged environment, and you might learn something and you might change. And so that's what was my introduction to just, going around town without shoes.
Speaking of challenge, any challenges with the whole no shirt, no shoes, no service
Oh
problem
yeah,
in
yeah.
cities? Okay.
And you know where that came from? That came from the hippie days. And people in
Okay.
many cases did not like the hippies. And it's interesting. In hindsight, we could say, well, the hippies, they were right. The Vietnam War was not a good idea. But people were freaked out about them because they were back to nature, and a lot of people in our world are have lost connection with nature and are put off by that. I was in a Dunkin' Donuts in Vermont. Yes, it was in Vermont, and somebody in there said, "Hey, you can't be in here without shoes." And so I have a pair of slippers I carry, so I was fine. I put them on. You don't want to get into fights with people. It's easy to
Sure.
get into fights because nobody likes being told what to do. But when you put yourself out there, it forces you to engage with people. You understand you're going to surprise them in some cases, and you need to develop some procedures to either make your case or back off.
This is amazing. I love talking to people like you because, I have a kind of a preconceived notion of what I think you'll be like and what I think we're going to talk about. And I'm like, okay, Barefoot Kenny's out running barefoot. I mean, you're barefoot all the time, which is amazing. I didn't even know that before we started. So I love that. I love the things I discover about people. I think that's cool. I love that you're doing that. I think it's pretty awesome that you're doing that. And like you said, you started off kind of pragmatic. It's just, it's, hey, so I help with injury. It's just become a whole way of life for you.
Well, thank you, Jake. But I think this is a common theme for a lot of folks that I know that you're talking to. I'm going to go back to Jeremy George, and he had challenges, and he said, "I'm going to put together." He put together his own challenge, which was 52 bucket list items in 52 weeks, and he said, "This is my way taking charge of my life right now. I need to do something that works for me because the conventional wisdom about what I'm supposed to be doing has sort of left me high and dry. I need to take charge, put my hands on the wheel, turn the wheel real sharp, pull up on the parking brake, do one of those emergency 180s, and then peel out in the other direction." And he did that. And he changed
Absolutely.
as a result. He learned and he changed.
Definitely. The other thing too, I think is amazing. Not only are you just out and about barefoot, like you said, you're running marathons. What'd you say? The last 26 have been barefoot. You're
That's
doing
right.
that sort of thing. You're also bagging peaks, peak bagging, as they say. And I know you did a challenge. I think you're still, you're still doing these challenges. You got more challenges to come. But can we talk about the grid? What is the grid? Where are the Catskills? Kind of give me the whole, what this challenge is. Again, the word challenge. You heard the word challenge and you're off.
So the grid is a certain kind of peak bagging project, and you can do it anywhere where there's a list of mountains. Now, I'm not sure I would try doing it in the Himalayas because whatever the list of mountains is would be really hard. The Catskills are in New York State, and they're about 2 hours north of New York City. And New York's got the Adirondacks, which are a little bit taller. They're another 2 hours further north. The Catskills are not huge mountains. They're 3,500 to 4,000 feet generally. But the terrain is very rugged, steep rocky trails, thick forest. One of the distinctions of the Catskills is a number of the peaks don't have official trails. So you have to navigate to the summit using map and compass or GPS or just paying attention. But it's hard to see in the Catskills. The vegetation is very thick, in the summer anyhow. So in the Catskills, there's a peak bagging list that includes 35 mountains. And that's a common challenge/goal for a lot of people. It's a way to just get out there and enjoy the mountains, but do it in a structured format that other people have done. That adds some social meaning to the project. The grid takes a peak bagging list to the next level, and you could do it anywhere where there's a list. You want to complete that list in each month of the year. So for the Catskills, that's 35 high peaks times 12 months is 420 climbs. Now, you don't have to do it in 1 year. you can take as long as you like to finish it. And for most people, it ends up being a multi-year project. But this is something I discovered accidentally at a point in time in my life where other things were not going perfectly. And so I talked about, I had a corporate job, and, I think a lot of times we progress in our career, and then we hit sort of a leveling off place where you're like, gee, to get to the next level, that's going to be really hard. Or the people who I'm competing with are actually really good. And that's a risky place to be because you can lose a lot of energy when you realize that maybe your idealistic goals for yourself to be the CEO or the president of the United States or whatever you had imagined, maybe the probability of getting there was lower than you thought. So the things were slow at work. And so I was like, great, I'll do more running. But then I began to injure myself. And there's a point, if you get good at running, that means you're getting good at pushing yourself. But apparently, as we get old, the platform loses resilience. And so you set yourself up for some problems. So both of those things were beginning to challenge me. And I sat around thinking to myself, this is what Henry David Thoreau meant when he wrote that the majority of men, and of course, this is 19th century, so he meant the majority of people. The majority of people live lives of quiet desperation. And I was like, hey, that sounds like me. And that had not been my attitude up to this point. So I was, wondering, because before that I had done marathons and ultras, and I had done some record-setting runs. I had set a record on the long path. I had set a record for running the Badwater Double. And those were hugely empowering and thrilling adventures. And now I was sort of stuck. That's when I heard about the grid. And I thought, what a perfect project. Because I don't have to race. I can take my time. I can scratch off the peaks, as I can get to them on the weekends or taking vacation time. And I can give myself a multi-year runway to achieve a meaningful goal. So that project immediately took over my life and became the most important thing that I was doing. And so I threw myself into the project. I've got a book coming out in the fall on this. I think you might say there's possibly a little bit of an obsessive undertone to it, but this became the most important project in my life. And I think it was like Jeremy's 52 bucket list. It was my chance to take control of my life and achieve a goal that was meaningful to me. And it ended up being a project where I really learned a lot about myself and changed.
Amazing. The Catskills itself is about 35 mountains, peaks, so to speak. How long did it take you to do the 420? Are you still doing it?
So when I discovered the grid, which was entirely coincidental, I actually ran into somebody and he had a backpack with a little banner pinned to it. It said 35 times 12 equals 420. And I was like, what does that mean? And he explained it to me and I didn't really understand. And then a few months later, I ran into somebody else on the trail randomly and they mentioned that they had just finished the grid for January. And I was like, I've heard about it. What is this crazy project? How does it work? And they explained it, and I finally got it. But when I discovered the grid, I had done so much hiking and running already in the Catskills that I had a head start. So I was able to go back through my training logs and find 120 or so peaks I had already climbed and could find the dates. So I only had 300 to go. So that took me 2 years to do that 300.
I would imagine, I'm just imagining this, and obviously I've never been there, so I don't know really what it's like, but you said, the summer it's thick with vegetation, other times of the year it's different. And I guess you're doing this through different times of the year. Could you tell, it's probably like a whole different experience doing a peak in winter versus summer.
Well, and look, there are places like New Hampshire that have seriously dangerous winters, right? The Catskills isn't that bad, but it's a real winter up there. And, also often when you take on these projects, you tend to, whether consciously or unconsciously, you tend to do the easy stuff first. And you end up, and so I got into my second year and I was like, holy crap, I have 100 winter peaks left to do. January, February, March, first half of April, and then November and December. The winter can be the winter can be easy or it can be difficult, but fresh snow requiring snowshoes. Most of the time it's not this bad, but there were a couple times I had to get out there. And when you're on a schedule to get this done, like a normal person would say, fine, it's not great, conditions, I'll just finish the grid a year later. But if you're in a hurry to do something, and why would you be in a hurry? Because it's meaningful to you and you want to get it done. Just like you want to get to the end of the half marathon, right? You want to get to the end, right? So then you have to drag yourself out. So the toughest times for me was when there was fresh, deep snow. So like 2-3 feet of fresh snow, and suddenly you're going at best 1 mile an hour. And then you go uphill and it's like, no, it's 2 hours to go 1 mile. I think my slowest hike was 3 hours to go 1 mile. And the snow, if the sun comes out and the snow starts to get soft and heavy, then you've got like 10 pounds on each foot and you're carrying a big pack because you need more gear and so forth. So there's nothing that 1,000,000,000 other hikers haven't contended with, but for me, that was the challenging part of the project. And that's what made it intense was the need to get out there, whether conditions were good or bad. And there's subtle things too, Jake. Like, I don't know about you, I love the sun. And in the sun, I feel energetic. And when the fog comes curling in overhead, it sucks out a little bit of my energy. And so the winters were also difficult because of you lost the sparkle of spring and summer and the colors of fall.
Yeah, there's definitely a bounce in my step in the summertime running versus the wintertime. And I'm an early morning person, like during the week, and so I usually do my long runs for the weekend. And so then it's light outside, and so I feel so much better than when I'm running. It's pitch black out and I'm wearing a headlamp, and it's just a different vibe. So I totally get that. What made you decide I want to write a book about this? Did you think about that before you started it, or was it while you're doing it? What made you want to do that?
Well, I enjoy writing. I think when we have experiences that are intense, I think most of us feel an impulse to share that with others. And I think you were talking with Jeremy about this, and there's a great quote from Marshall Ulrich, who is a legendary ultra runner and mountaineer. He's done Everest as well as the Badwater Race multiple times. And he said, if you're just going out to do peak bagging or other kinds of bucket lists, if you're just going out to brag, that's vulgar. But if you're going out to learn and admire and share, that can be noble. And so part of my thinking, I knew I was going to write up something about this because to me, part of what made this project so thrilling was the variety and the contrast. And 35 mountains are all different. Plus, there are different routes up them. Plus, they change with each point of the year. And plus, you and I are always changing. And some days we're feeling great and some days we're dragging ass. And so I really felt like the 420 climbs were 420 meaningful experiences in just the brilliance of that and the joy of being out in a natural environment. I just wanted to share that if it would resonate with anybody at all.
I love that. I'm glad you did. Tell us what's the official name of the book?
The official name is Chasing the Grid.
Chasing the Grid.
And it is available for pre-order on Amazon, and it comes out in September.
Excellent. Very good. Okay. So yeah, everyone, I'll put some links too, so everyone can get to your website or whatever to do that. So Chasing the Grid. I think there was a subheading too that talks some about the spiritual side of it.
That's right. And the subtitle is An Ultra Runner's Physical and Spiritual Pursuit of the Ultimate Mountain Challenge.
Perfect.
By the way, the publisher at first, they were like, let's call it Conquering the Grid. And I was like, no. You don't conquer. Chasing is fine. You don't conquer the mountains. You learn from them. But the spiritual part, that was sort of that has been an interest of mine since I can remember. And it's again just pragmatic. Here I am, and where are the levers that I pull to operate myself? So in the book, I talk about not just climbing this mountain and then that mountain, but also sort of what I learned. And there's a great tradition in America called the Transcendentalist tradition. It's Thoreau and Emerson and Walt Whitman and John Muir, and we learn about these guys in high school and then forget them and move on, right, to our high-tech digital ecosystem that we inhabit now, and hopefully AI won't take over.
Kidding.
Whatever. But the more I think about this world and how super high-tech we've become, the more I go back to know strength and joy and creativity come from nature, not from technology, and agency too. And so as I went out into the mountains, and hopefully this is interesting to the reader, I began to have some weird experiences just in the sense that spending so much time out there in the mountains, I began to, if you will, rediscover the more original way of relating to our environment. In the modern world, it's all about I. I'm this, I'm that, I have this label. And I can do that. I can dress myself up as a runner or a barefoot person or a worker or whatever. When you're out in the mountains, that starts to fade. And then you start to realize, hey, I'm not really that much different from the other living creatures out here. I have a brain. A tree might not have a brain, but we're both people in the sense that we're just trying to survive and grow and reproduce, maybe. John Muir used to call trees people and plants people and butterflies people. Everything was a person to him. And I think we still have tree huggers and people like that. And so that to me is part of the spiritual element of this. It's trying to get disengaged from the modern world and rediscover in a sense, who we really are.
Amazing. So I want to ask about all of these ascents that you've had, all these climbs, these mountains, and 420 just in the Catskills. I'm sure you've bagged more than that just around the country. Colorado's got some nice sized mountains, things like that. I think you've been in Colorado. Is there any particular climb or mountain that stuck out to you for whatever reason? Either it was difficult or maybe it was the beauty of it, whatever, you think. Is there a particular one that stood out to you?
So my current project is to climb 1,000 mountains barefoot before I'm too old to do so. So it's a project that's specifically designed. It forced me to manage myself gracefully through the aging process. And Mount Elbert is 14,444 or something like that in Colorado. That was actually a straightforward climb. It's 4,000 feet up, but I didn't have any particular problems. And to my astonishment, on the way down, I met another barefoot hiker, a young man named, I think it was Mike from Boulder. But Katahdin was difficult in Maine, and I approached Katahdin from the knife edge. And the knife edge it's a very narrow, I guess it's called an arête. It's not really an arête technically, but it's a very narrow sort of knife edge ridge between, I forget the mountain to the south and then the peak. And the trail sort of creeps along the crest, and you're climbing over rocks and boulders, and it's not dangerous per se, but it's not really a trail. And barefoot, you don't want to just go lunging and jumping on sharp rocks. So I did a lot of that crawling and sliding on my butt, and it was very slow. So that sticks out in my memory as being difficult. But I'm at 521.
Okay,
Right
that was
now.
going to be my question: is where you're at with the whole
Yeah.
1,000
And
peaks?
I'll be out in Utah at some point. I'm heading out to California in a few weeks. One peak that stands out in during the grid, which I did barefoot, is Wyndham, and I went up there with my dog at the time, Odie, and I had a very strange objective. I said I'd been reading Walt Whitman, and I've been reading Walt Whitman's views on the self and time, and I said, well, we'll go up a Wyndham, and of course, Whitman's tome of poetry is called Leaves of Grass. So I said, well, climb Wyndham. We'll stop at the top and think a little bit about Whitman's poetry. And one of the things I had been doing was observing some of the different plants in the Catskills, and I realized that I hadn't learned to identify any of the grasses. And the path to Wyndham is sort of grassy in places. So I was like, cool, we'll study the grass. So that's one of the chapters in the book, because we got to the top, and as a runner, I'm always used to being in motion. And so the very act of stopping is difficult for me, unless I'm really, tired out or something. And even then, the clock is always ticking. So it was just an interesting experience to sit at the top for a while. And Odie, is the same as me. He likes to be on the move. But as he got a little bit older on this climb, he took a nap, and I studied a bee sitting on a meadowsweet bush, and a private jet flew overhead. And then out in the distance, some gliders were circling. And then a sparrow flew past, and a few seconds later, a couple of vultures flew past after it, perhaps. So it was a special experience. Whitman is very clear about his views. We think of time as rushing past, but I think he thinks of time more as a permanent kind of direction, complementary to distance, the way we learn in physics. John Muir had a comment in one of his diary entries when he was out in the California mountains. He talked about hiking up into the mountains and then running back to camp in the moonlight. And it was such a thrilling experience. He said, "So ends a day that will never end." And I read that to myself and I was like, well, how does a day never end? And what he's saying is that the experience is permanent and the experience changes you. And you and I and others, we change other people. So the experience is permanent, even if we're not. So that kind of thinking about time was one of the things I came away from the Grid Project with, maybe a little bit of a different perspective.
Love that. I appreciate your perspective on all this. This has been eye-opening to me. What about some of the setbacks? What are some of the setbacks you faced?
Well, during during the Grid, the setbacks were, the challenges like that deep snow, right? So there was nothing radical about the setbacks. It's just the act of dealing with them. I think part of this, what I call the spiritual journey, I think of it as a lot about being about agency. I'm going to take over my life. I'm going to make my decisions, and I can make decisions to help other people because I like other people. But I'm going to make those decisions instead of being gaslit or bullied into thinking the right things or dressing the right way. So part of the spiritual development, I think, is just getting stronger so that we can manage ourselves. And how do you get stronger? Well, if you're a weightlifter, you go to the gym and you lift weights. If you're a runner, you do a half marathon or whatever you want. And I think it's just that practice of making an effort to push yourself into a zone of discomfort and manage yourself in that zone. And you come out of it and you're like, hey, but there were some challenges. One of the things I mentioned, you get in some cases you got to navigate in the Catskills off trail, and in some cases there are what's called relic boreal forests, which consist of thickets of fir and spruce trees, like little Christmas trees. But Thoreau called them devil trees because their branches interlocked like this, and you have to sort of slide through them, and sometimes they all fall down in piles, and you have to. Hopefully, you were paying attention and you saw the deadfall and you aim around it. But sometimes you don't, and then you're crawling through the deadfall while the stuff is trying to move the stuff out of your face. That can get frustrating. Again, it's like the snow. You're a runner. You're used to moving quickly, and now you're looking at your watch and you're not even going 1 mile an hour. And I would get angry. I would get frustrated. And part of me, there's a great Emerson quote: "Lose the military, hurry." And of course, having been a ranger for a short period of time, but the corporate America is the same as the Army. It's, you've got a mission, get your mission done, accountability, performance, etc. But he said, lose the military, hurry, adopt the pace of nature. Her secret is patience. And part of me knew that after years of being over caffeinated and rushing around mindlessly, I needed to learn how to move slowly. And actually, the stunning thing is moving slowly I found was mentally much more difficult than putting out an all-out effort and running quickly. So those were challenges. Those were challenges. And so the 420 peaks was part of how I took myself offline. I subjected myself to the challenges of being tired or the trees or rain or snow or whatever it was, and just worked on myself. And I think at one point in the book I say, if you drag yourself back and forth across rugged terrain long enough, it might smooth off some of the rough edges of your personality. So that's it. Just practice at being a person and moving yourself is just how we try to get better.
I love it. I love all just the life lessons that you learn as you pick up the barefoot part, and then you like, let me, bag these peaks. Let me do the Catskills, the Grid. Let me get out there and do the Grid. You mentioned 1,000. You're working towards 1,000. You're at 520. Do you have a set date in mind, or are you just going to kind of take your time getting to that? Do you have any other challenges you're working on as well? Because I know challenge is a big thing for you.
Yeah. The challenge, these are, I think of these in some ways like pilgrimages. And I was thinking that listening to Jeremy talking about his bucket list, it's a chance to take yourself offline and work on yourself and learn, challenge yourself and learn. And for some people who have super high powered jobs and they're changing the world, they just need to do that because they're having such a big impact. But I think many of them benefit from taking a break from the 9 to 5 or whatever, the 8 to 6 or whatever it is, and doing different things to learn, because it's a shame we only have one life. So I was just thinking the other day, it might be time to do something different. And the last thing I want to do is commit myself on your podcast, because if I say something on your podcast,
You heard it here first, everybody.
But the Thousand Mountains is meant to be a multi-year project, right? I'm also doing the 50 marathons in 50 states, but that's a terrible project because it's just endless logistics and travel. And I'm at 11, I think, or 12. So I'm actually potentially due for something, but I'm also looking at the opportunities just to make a difference. So I'm involved, with a not-for-profit. That's important to me. We're going through some change at work, and I'm trying to think, how can I make a difference here? Alma mater, I went to a school, and the current administration is talking about changing the tax rules, and there's challenges. I'm like, they're not facing up the challenges. They're not taking the action that I would like to see them take. Could I somehow get through to them and help them think this through? Probably not. But so I think about other things. And the great thing, these projects out in nature, they're like a baseline. And I've made some decisions like not to take maybe a bigger job because it would not give me enough time to do my running and hiking. But I would take a job or do something else if I felt it would be better for the world and better for me than another mountain. So hopefully I put myself in a position where I can flex in different directions.
Very good. This has been fascinating. I've really enjoyed our conversation, getting to know you and who you are. It's been amazing. There's one question I always like to ask, because I ask on every show, but for you, Ken, what does adventure mean to you?
Yeah, and I think it's such a great question, Jake. And I have been on some adventures in life, and not just in the mountains, at work and in other places. I think an adventure is something where you have a clear mission. You have a clear objective. It could be like Bilbo and the dwarves going after Smaug's gold, right? But there's something you're setting out to do, which you have a crystal clear understanding of what the objective is. And there's risk. There's risk. You might not be successful, and there might be people out there or dragons trying to stop you. And I think the adventure tends to leave the community of people who are working and are productive and are raising families and doing the normal things in life. And you're saying, I'm going to leave that behind and take a risk and do something different because it might matter. It might be important enough to take that risk. Or you're impatient and you want the challenge. You're not suited to be just somebody who follows the normal path. So those are the ingredients in my mind. The adventures can be thrilling and you can win great prizes, but you can also lose. So I know I've done things that haven't worked out well, and this can be very painful, besides the lost time and energy.
Absolutely. Ken, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing who you are and the whole idea. I'm gonna be taking off my shoes here a little more, I think, after this conversation.
Well, you should do, and I'll leave that as a challenge to all your listeners. They may, at the risk of them just deciding to turn off, but take a few steps somewhere and then ask your feet what they think. And it would be I'd be really curious to hear what you find out.
I love
that
it.
Would be a small adventure. That would be, and that's the thing I like to say about Barefoot. Barefoot turns every walk or hike or run into an adventure.
That's
you
a
don't
great
necessarily
point.
know what you're going to encounter, and you have to pay attention.
That is a great point. I love it. Ken, thank you so much for coming on Journey with Jake.
You're so welcome, Jake. Thank you so much for the invitation.
What an inspiring and thought-provoking conversation with Ken Posner. From running barefoot to tackling the grid, Ken's story is a powerful reminder that adventure isn't just about the miles. It's about mindset, simplicity, and find deeper meaning in the journey. Thank you, Ken. If you want to follow along with Ken, be sure to check him out on Instagram at Long Brown Path. That's long_brown_path. And visit his website, Barefoot Ken. You can also pre-order his upcoming book, Chasing the Grid, an ultra runner's physical and spiritual journey in the pursuit of the ultimate mountain challenge. I highly recommend it. I'm looking forward to getting my copy. Thanks for tuning in to Journey with Jake. If Ken's story inspired you, do me a favor and share this episode with a friend or leave a quick rating or review. It really helps others find these incredible stories. We've got another great episode coming your way next week with Cody Sudmeyer, the founder of Spur Experiences. We'll be talking all about the power of choosing experiences over things and how that mindset can lead to a more meaningful life. And as always, remember, it's not always about the destination as it is about the journey. Take care, everybody.